Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Chesapeake Bar Association, we'd like to welcome you to the Chesapeake Commonwealth Attorneys Candidates Forum. My name is Amanda Newens, and I'm on the board for the Chesapeake Bar Association. And I'd like to introduce you to our board who's present tonight. Our co-chair to the forum, Matthew Wooten, whoever Matthew is. Our board member, Andrew Patzig, and also a board member, Hethel Chawla, who's present in the room. We'd like to recognize some of our special guests that are present with us here today. We have retired Judge Carter. Some of our members of City Council, Mr. Stephen Best, Mr. Don Carey, Ms. Susan Vitale. We have one of our clerks of court, Ms. Bonnie Cuffey, the clerk of the Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court. And then from the school board, we have Mr. Harry Murphy. It is my great pleasure now to introduce to you our moderator of tonight's forum, Mr. Joel Rubin. Joel Rubin was an award-winning reporter for Wavy TV during his 15 years with the NBC affiliate in Portsmouth. He hosted On the Record with Joel Rubin, a weekly political and issues talk show on WVEC, the local ABC affiliate, for the next 17 years while building his business today called Rubin Communications Group. RCG primarily provides public relations, video productions, and strategic marketing counsel to a host of clients across the business and nonprofit spectrum. A 1975 graduate of the University of Virginia and a dedicated fan of Wahoo sports as well as ODU basketball and the Norfolk Tides, Joel is the past president of the Temple of Israel Synagogue in Norfolk and past chair of the Virginia Sports Hall of Fame. A native of Richmond, he lives in Virginia Beach with his wife of more than 41 years, Sarah Jo. 2 of their 5 grandchildren live 2 miles away from them, and the other 3 in Washington, D.C. Please join me in welcoming Joel Rubin.
You to hold your applause because, we don't want to take away too much time from these folks, but I don't want you to hold your applause. But anyway, it's great to be with you tonight. And to see such a good crowd of interested citizens here for this Commonwealth Attorney's race. We have 2 great candidates, and what we're going to do tonight is we're going to allow each of them to give you an opening statement for a couple minutes and then a closing statement when we're all done, and then I'm going to ask a series of questions that I devised, and nobody else has seen them but me, and I am not going to be a jerk about time, okay? I'm going to let them answer the question. If they go under a minute or over a minute, it's okay. But if I feel like they've gone on too long or you're getting bored, I'll wrap them up. It's all about you at the end of the day, not about them. It's what you want to hear, and you want to hear as much as you can from both of these candidates. So we'll do that. And we had a little coin flip before we started, and Shelley Wood won, so she's going to get our first 2 minutes to tell you about who she is and why she's running for Commonwealth Attorney.
Make sure my mic is on. Is it working?
Is she on?
Hello?
Oh, now it's fine. There you go.
There it goes. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to the Chesapeake Bar Association and the board for working so hard to put this event on. Thank you for the distinguished guests for being here, as well as Mr. Rubin for moderating. Thank you for all of the supporters and my family who have come from far to be here for my support, as well as my dear friends. So I appreciate everyone being here tonight. For those of you who don't know, I grew up in the city of Chesapeake. And when I say I grew up in the city of Chesapeake, I bleed purple because I am a Hornet through and through. Deep Creek High School is where I come from. My mother and all of her siblings, they went to Deep Creek High School as well. So I have been in this area basically my entire life. I came to this area shortly after birth because I am the daughter of an immigrant from the Philippines. My father, at the age of 19, was told by his mother that education and making the best possible life for you and your family is what's important. So 50 years ago, we determined, he came here to this country with no more than the clothes issued by the United States Navy on his back. He made a good life for himself, he worked hard, and he taught my brother and I the importance of work ethic and integrity. So I come before you with integrity and the work ethic that I have used to come here and be where I am today. I went to Old Dominion University, I went to Regent Law, and after that I became a public defender. During my years in law school, I was always interested in criminal law. So my third year of law school, the Commonwealth of Virginia allows third-year law students to have a third-year practice certificate. So for an entire year, my third year of law school, I practiced law as a prosecutor in the Norfolk Commonwealth Attorney, and I had a caseload just as if I was an assistant Commonwealth Attorney. After passing the bar, I moved on to be a 2-year public defender. I worked in private practice for 2 years. I then opened my own law firm, and here I am today before you asking for your vote as Commonwealth's Attorney. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Shelley. All right, Republican candidate is Matt Hamill.
Well, thank you very much, Joel. Thank you first to the Chesapeake Bar Association for this opportunity to present tonight. Thank you to Mr. Rubin for organizing the questions. And I want to thank Ms. Wood as well for the opportunity for us to sit down and share our vision for the future of the Commonwealth Attorney's Office as well as the city. You know, I came to Chesapeake, not unlike thousands of other people, 16 years ago on Navy military orders. But before that, my journey to Tidewater really began 20 years ago when I was working for a bank in New York City and going to law school at night. And I was working across the street from the World Trade Center on 9/11 with a building that was attached to the North Tower of the World Trade Center. And on that day, I witnessed a plane, the first plane, hit the tower and went to the window, and I watched dozens and dozens and dozens of people jump to their death while holding hands, closing their eyes, women holding their dresses down. And that day fundamentally changed my life. It changed the trajectory of my life to want to dedicate my life to military and public service. As soon as I graduated from law school, the first thing I did was join the United States Navy as a Navy JAG prosecutor, and I was stationed here in Norfolk at the Navy's busiest litigation office worldwide. I was also tasked as a Special Assistant U.S. Attorney to prosecute cases in federal court. At my earliest opportunity, I then volunteered for a tour of duty in Iraq, where I got to set up parole boards inside a prison in Baghdad for 8 months of my life. And I got to bring the rule of law and our constitutional principles of due process to the Iraqi people. I got to sit across the table from people like Chemical Ali, Tariq Aziz, and Saddam's driver. You know, I'm running to be the next Commonwealth's Attorney because I think we have something pretty special here in Chesapeake. I think we have one of the safest cities in the region, if not the state. I think we have wonderful schools, and I think we have values that are special to this city. I want to be a part of that conversation. I'd like to lead this office, and I'd like to focus on new things as well. I think we need to focus on elder abuse and a host of other initiatives that I hope I can get into tonight. I hope through the course of this forum and over the next several weeks to earn your trust, your confidence, and your support. And my name is Matt Hamill, and I'm running to be the next Commonwealth's Attorney. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I think the thing that everybody wants to pursue when they get into the legal field, and particularly in criminal justice, is the word justice. And I want you both to define justice as you see it, and the pursuit of justice, and how that would impact how you would serve as the Commonwealth Attorney. Shelley, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Joel. So I recently, for the last 6 years, served as a substitute judge for the city of Chesapeake. So not only have I seen criminal law from the prosecutorial side, from the defense side, but I've also had the privilege of seeing it from the side of a judge. So justice is making sure that people are heard. 9 times out of 10, every person who goes into court, there's going to be someone who walks out unhappy. There's 2 sides to every case. And unfortunately, someone has to walk out feeling like they lost. However, justice is when they are heard. We need to make sure that every person is heard. We need to make sure that every person feels that they are treated fairly. If we're not treating people fairly across the board, whether it be their race or the color of their skin, then that's not justice. So justice is ensuring that a victim feels that they have been heard, that a defendant has been heard, and that everyone walks out feeling like they've had a voice.
Matt?
Joel, first of all, I feel like we are on the Tonight Show sitting up here. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but if you reach under your chairs and you grab a ticket, I bought a car for one of you, as long as you vote for me. Look, justice, in my opinion, is not about winning and losing cases. It's about achieving a means to keep society safe. And I think it takes buy-in by multiple parties. It takes buy-in by fair prosecutors. It takes a vigorous defense by the defense bar. And it takes people being honest in court. And then it takes a fair trier of fact. It takes somebody who's like an umpire who's going to call balls and strikes. And I personally enjoy our jury system. To me, that's what justice is. It's about coming into court, having your day in court each and every time, and if you did something wrong, and if society needs to hold you accountable, that you will be held accountable, but in a fair way. And that doesn't mean we can't talk about other things, you know, about diversionary programs or about things that we can do to rehabilitate people or bring them into society. Doesn't mean we have to smack down people so severely that they can't be rehabilitated. But there are some crimes that are so serious that we can't do those things. And I think that justice is finding that pathway through those fact patterns and through those cases to ultimately keep society safe.
How much discretion will you give individual prosecutors working in your office to enter into agreements with defense attorneys to resolve a matter prior to trial in which that particular prosecutor has the responsibility to prosecute? I'll start with you, Matt.
So the question is about discretion?
Yes.
The discretion for prosecutors?
And to give to your individual prosecutors, or do they got to come back to you every time and say, can I do this or not do this?
I think that's a good question. I think that has to do with leadership. You know, one of the things I learned in the Navy, and I worked for many, many different commanding officers, from 4-star admirals to 2-star Army generals, down to multiple captains and commodores. And you know, there's two different leadership styles that I saw. There were those commanding officers that wanted to drive people through threats and bullying to achieve an end. And then there were those commanding officers that wanted to inspire to lead. They wanted people to go to their fullest potential. I'd like to think I would try to be a Commonwealth's attorney that would be of the latter. You know, Ms. Parr has been the prosecutor, the chief prosecutor of this city for 16 years and has done a remarkable job. And I'm not tonight going to say one thing to denigrate how she's done things or the kind of discretion she's given to her prosecutors. But my personal philosophy is, if you hire excellent people and you empower them to do a job and you tell them what the rules of the road are and you say, look, you can operate within these rules of the road, then you give them a wide berth of discretion. If they want to go outside these guardrails, come talk to me. And I think that would probably be the quintessence of my style and my answer in that regard.
Shelley?
Well, Mr. Hamill and I definitely agree that it comes down to leadership, and I think leadership comes with experience. I have experience. I know the prosecutors that are currently in the office. There are 57 staff members total in that office. That includes Ms. Parr. And as I see it right now, and in my experience in working with these prosecutors who are good attorneys, they have the discretion to make decisions with regard to their cases. Now, as I understand it, new attorneys to the office don't have as much discretion. And I think that's appropriate. We have to make sure that they understand the policies. They know what's going on in the office. I, being on the defense side for basically my entire career and knowing how this office works, I know of the policies. I know what they do and what they do not do and what they allow and what they do not allow. And I think having that experience along with leadership is what's important. So to understand each and every attorney that is there, what the policies are they capable of running those policies and following them? So yes, it comes down to leadership, having the experience, having done every single type of crime that there is basically in the Commonwealth of Virginia over my career, including jury trials. I think it's very important that those that are in the office and as a leader, as the Commonwealth's Attorney, I have that experience to impart on who the individuals that are there now, as well as the new individuals that will be coming in. As a leader, we have to be there to also mentor, and if we don't have that experience, then we're not able to mentor, have leadership, and then allow them to have the discretion that they would learn.
Well, my understanding is neither one of you has worked as a prosecutor in Chesapeake before, correct?
That's correct, but I don't believe Mr. Hamill has done any criminal state law. I have.
Okay, so well, let's talk about that for
Sure.
a second, because often in Commonwealth attorneys races, whether in this city or our neighboring cities, somebody's moving up, is running because they've been a prosecutor for X number of years. We don't have that here. So you say you understand the office.
I do.
How well can you understand the office if you've not been a prosecutor? And I think most of the law you practice has been family law, correct?
That is not correct. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
so tell us what the truth is about your practice.
So my practice, as I stated in my opening, I actually did have a full caseload as a third-year law student at the Norfolk Commonwealth Attorney's office. So I prosecuted crimes in state court, which is what the Commonwealth Attorney's office does. I've also worked as a public defender, which again involves crime and defense of crime. After leaving the public defender's office, just up until actually the time that I decided to run, I then served as a court-appointed attorney for our city. So I've been heavily involved in criminal defense work. And the thing about being a lawyer, whether it's a criminal lawyer, a family law lawyer, civil litigator, as lawyers, we have to anticipate what the other side is going to do. If we don't anticipate what they're going to do, then we're not doing our job as an attorney for the people or persons that we represent. So while I have spent majority of my career as a criminal defense attorney, I anticipate what the other side is going to say. I've worked with these Commonwealth attorneys. I know them by name. They know me. And so having that experience, I think helps, because I'm able to mentor. I'm able to step into that role and be a leader and mentor them. Yes, I have practiced also as a family law attorney, and majority of the practice recently, actually all of it, quite frankly, recently has been family law. However, up until I stopped taking court-appointed work, there was a pretty good split there between the two.
Matt, talk about your experience, particularly in the criminal side, and how has that prepared you, or do you feel prepared to come in now and be the chief prosecutor in Chesapeake?
Sure. I began my career as a Navy prosecutor in the Navy's busiest worldwide litigation office here in Norfolk. So 29 days after I graduated Naval Justice School, I was trying my first case. We were handed a stack of about 30 cases the day that I got there. I tried dozens and dozens and dozens of cases in the Navy, ranging from low-level crimes like missing ships movement and AWOL cases, all the way up to aggravated sexual assault, child pornography, child rape, all sorts of sexual assault type cases. I dual-hatted as a special assistant U.S. attorney in that role, where we were helping out in federal court, prosecuting the misdemeanor crimes that occurred on the naval installations and the federal installations in Hampton Roads. I continued to do that not only as a prosecutor for several years, I also then was a defense counsel with the Navy, because the Navy has this tendency to send you to do other jobs. So when I came back from Iraq, I actually did some defense work. And even in my reserve capacity, I'm still a commander in the Navy Reserves, and I'm attached actually right now to the unit that supports my very first prosecution unit. Last year, I tried a general court-martial case, a felony-level case, as a civilian, as a defense counsel, and I received a full acquittal. It was in the Navy Times last year, about a year and a half ago. I continue to do quite a bit of criminal defense work, actually, although my practice is predominantly family law, but there oftentimes morphs into protective orders. There's assault and batteries between family members. There's a whole host of crime that I have tried to defend my clients. I would say what prepares me, though, for this job is not doing prosecution work or doing defense work. I think what prepares me for doing this job is a conglomeration of all of these things. It's setting up parole boards in a foreign country. It's serving on the city council and passing budgets and understanding funding, the funding of the office, as well as how to advocate for additional funding, how to work with our city council and our city governments to get more funding, how to work with our various city departments to make sure that we are in concert working with them And one of the things that I did while on city council that I'm pretty proud of is I worked with the former chief judge of the General District Court as well as the police chief to approve and fund a program that streamlines the police documentation getting to the courthouse. So I bring with me a host of experiences that I think prepare me for this job, but ultimately it's leadership, it's integrity, and it's style.
I've always found, and I've been around here for a long time and known a lot of Commonwealth attorneys and obviously observed how the criminal justice system works. And I think that people look to the Commonwealth attorney as sort of the conscience of the community in certain. You're sort of determining what you, in a sense, believe is the community standard that you're supposed to uphold in terms of justice, fairness, punishment when it comes to criminal law. Do you feel that way? That, Matt, I'll start with you. And what do you think, looking out at the city that you live in and serve, is sort of our community standard here? What do the people of Chesapeake want from their prosecutor?
I mean, I think what the average citizen wants is what I want. I have 4 children. I want my children to be safe. I want them to go to school. I want them to go to excellent schools. And I don't want crime in my neighborhood. I think that's why so many people either move here and stay here like me on military orders, or people like Shelley stay here forever, because it is a special place. And I think there's some truth, a lot of truth, to what you said about the Commonwealth's attorney being the conscience of the community. I think that if there are any issues where that office doesn't operate with integrity and people lose trust in that office, that is the beginning of the end. And I think that there are a lot of things going on nationally and at the state level that are of concern. And I think that the citizens of Chesapeake are concerned about it right now. And I think that's why they're here.
Let me ask, and maybe I'll throw it over to you here. Every city is changing in terms of its demographics. And probably after George Floyd and other incidents, they're more hypersensitive to how minority groups and others are treated by the police or by the Commonwealth attorneys or district attorneys or whatever they're called across the country. So do you look at Chesapeake not as people maybe looked at it 20 years ago, but looking at it today and saying, how does this inform how I'm going to be as a Commonwealth attorney?
Well, I would say that I agree with Matt. I actually agree with everything he said, because it's true. We want everyone to feel safe. I have 3 children. I grew up here. Most of my family is actually sitting here in the audience, and so and close friends who live in the city. So I absolutely agree with what Matt said. But I think what it goes to is making sure that people know that that's what's going to continue. I had a conversation with Chief Wright yesterday and commended him that we haven't seen the issues here in the city of Chesapeake that unfortunately other jurisdictions have. And so I hope that that continues as well. And just to touch on a couple things as well, going to Matt speaking about his experience in the military, I hope everyone realizes that while Matt talks about his military experience and being a prosecutor and doing those cases, please understand that the UCMJ, the law that is followed in the military, is different from our state code. It's different from our city ordinances. And while I certainly appreciate Matt's service to our country and him serving in that capacity, it is different. The experience is different. Trying a case in state court is different. And then as far as the funding is concerned, Mr. Hamill has been a city councilman for 2 years. He was elected as a city councilman in 2018. And to my knowledge, I think some of his literature has talked about wanting to get funding for the police and wanting to get funding for the Commonwealth's attorney. Well, I don't think that Matt has made any initiatives on his own to get funding for those departments. The police department needs funding. We need to fund the police, not take away funds from the police. I support funding the police and getting them education and getting them that training to ensure that we don't have situations like George Floyd here in our city of Chesapeake, because it is a great city. It's a wonderful place to raise our families.
All right,
That's why
let me let him respond
Sure.
To some of those
To which
statements.
attack?
I don't think it's attack so much as it's factual, right, Matt?
It's not. First of all, Uniform Code of Military Justice and the Military Rules of Evidence, the MREs are actually mirror images of the federal rules of evidence. So to say that I don't know how to try a criminal prosecution is like saying I don't know how to try a case in federal court. And I think that the burdens of proof, we all know what the burdens of proof are, and we all know what justice is. We all know what integrity is. And I'll just let that stand. As far as advocating for funding, I've been on the council actually 3.5 years. And, you know, our budget in the city of Chesapeake is $1.2 billion. And we give $50 million of that budget every year to the police department, $50 million to the sheriff's department, and $50 million to the fire department. We are a special city, and we do appropriately fund our police. And when the police chief came and said, look, we need this program, or we need cameras on school buses, or we need to get this computer system so that we can streamline our documents to the general district court, I advocated for that on the city council, and we passed those initiatives unanimously. So to say and attack me for not having that kind of experience, I don't think is a fair one. As far as the funding the police, that's interesting that Ms. Wood brings that up because her party doesn't stand for that. And so you could take that for what it's worth. But as far as funding the police, I have funded the police.
Okay, let me move on. The current Commonwealth Attorney has a long-standing policy mandating no plea deals for DUI charges. Is that a policy you intend to change? If so, why? And what effect do you think it would have on the balance between fairness to a defendant and public safety, if any? And I'll start with you, Shelley.
So I am aware that I'm aware that the Commonwealth Attorney's Office has that policy. I cannot speak at this time whether it would be appropriate to take it away or not take it away because as we all know, neither one of us are in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. I don't know what the basis for that policy is. I just know it exists because I've had to deal with it with my clients. I would imagine that there's a lot of thought that goes behind that. I don't know if it's a funding issue with grants. So I don't want to answer the question and be dishonest or mislead anyone, but I am aware of that policy, and certainly that's one of the policies that would be looked into. There's also other policies that, again, that exist that I don't necessarily know the basis for.
But that's also one of those sort of community standard questions, okay, that if the Commonwealth Attorney has discretion in something like
Absolutely.
this, it's based on we should prosecute or we should, have no plea deals for DUI because we want to look real tough on DUI, or we should have discretion on that. So I'm asking you to go back to the question I asked before
Right.
about what do you think the community standard is on something like that, and what would drive your decision whether to change that policy?
Well, I think the community standard is such that that drunk driving, it leads to death. We've seen it time and time again, and it's very unfortunate. And so there is a lot of concern for that. So the community standard, to answer that specific question, I think the question was about whether I would change the policy.
But you also said that you had clients, I'm sure, that you felt like deserved some discretion on certain cases and didn't
Sure.
get it because there's an ironclad policy. So I guess that's
Correct.
what I'm asking.
Correct. And again, because so the first question is, would I change that policy? And my answer to that is, I cannot answer that because I don't know what the basis of that is. Your next question was with regard to community standard. I think that everybody wants to make sure that our community is safe, and therefore the standard and the expectation has become that, as you said, ironclad fist, we make sure that we prosecute those crimes. So absolutely, that is the community standard. I think that that's what is accepted. I think that that is what is expected. But as far as the question with regard to whether I would lift that policy or not, I'm not able to answer that question.
Matt Hamill.
I think that every single policy needs to be reviewed when a new Commonwealth Attorney comes into office. I think that a fresh look at every single issue and how that office operates is a good thing. I think that, as I said before, I think that Ms. Parr has done an amazing job for the last 16 years, and she has set that policy in place, and it has served Chesapeake well. I believe that when you put the right leadership team in place, you can discuss the policies and see what sorts of changes need to be made. Like Ms. Wood, I'm not going to opine tonight on whether or not I'm going to change that policy. I think that it is a nuanced policy, and I think that it is one that needs to be looked at very seriously. But the one thing that I would say is that when you have the right team in place, I do believe that there is a good argument for providing expanded discretion to that team to operate to their potential. Because if you trust the people that you've hired, and you trust them to live your ideals to keep this city safe, then there is room for flexibility in discussing these policies.
The COVID-19 pandemic has created an enormous backlog of criminal cases in circuit court, and has led to a backlog on cases. As the new Commonwealth Attorney, what will you do to ensure that speedy trial is complied with and that cases are not lost because of speedy trial? I mean, you'd be entering the office right now, one, not having been in the office, but two, under COVID, it's really played havoc with the ability to get justice done in a timely manner. So I'll start with you, Matt.
So what's the, make sure, how do we ensure that we don't blow speedy trial?
Yeah, what are you going to do to make sure that it moves along? Or do you feel like you have any choice in that because the rules are being made by other people?
Well, I do think that the rules are being made by other people. I mean, if you look at what the General Assembly did in this last session, they abolished jury sentencing. So I would think if you're a defense counsel, you might want to try your case with more jury trials and then have a judge sentence your client. And you couple that with the perfect storm of having COVID, where the courts were shut down for over a year. And I think whoever wins, it's sort of be careful what you wish for, because I think it is going to be a very, very difficult environment to move cases along. And I think the answer to that question, though, is it's going to take a little bit of time and working with the defense bar as well as the judiciary to move these cases along. Because I think what is going to happen, and this is just my suspicion, is that there are going to be several cases where defendants are going to try their case to a jury and think they're going to get a better deal with the judge sentencing them, and they're going to get, it's going to be a very unpleasant day. And I think that we're going to see the pendulum swing, and I think that I think this is going to be an enormous time of growing pains. And I don't think there's an easy answer. I think what I would commit to is fostering a relationship with the defense bar. I would discuss this with my team of prosecutors. I would enhance their discretion to plea cases where they need to be pled. We'd look at diversionary programs with the right kind of circumstances, and we would take all of that as a recipe to try to move the docket along. But I think a lot of it, and in Chesapeake in particular, is dependent on outside sources. You said things that are out of our control. You've got court clerks, you've got judges that also have an idea. And I think what the Commonwealth's Attorney really ought to do is talk to those various entities, those various stakeholders, and it's going to be a problem for everybody. So the one good news in all of this is that the judges are facing the same challenge, and it's going to take a lot of coordination.
Sure.
I agree. It's going to take a lot of coordination. Unfortunately, there are lots of defendants who their cases are being pushed off. Our Supreme Court actually put a hold on everything because of the judicial emergency orders, and so speedy trial was actually stopped. It was paused. So there were defendants that have been in custody this entire time with no speedy trial clock running. So it has really created a mess. And our courts are doing the very best that they can to move these dockets along, but unfortunately we're still behind. So where does that leave us as a Commonwealth's Attorney and have these cases move along as best we can? Well, one of the things that also changed in the legislature is the fact that the body cam videos, we call them Axon body cam videos, the Commonwealth's Attorneys are now required to watch every single one of those videos. They have to watch them. They're discoverable. And so that's going to take a lot of time from our prosecutors to juggle that along with making sure the proper discovery is sent out, making sure that they are interfacing with the defense attorneys. And so I do agree with Matt in the fact that there's going to have to be a lot of working with the defense bar to see what we can do better. Within the office, perhaps there would be the opportunity for prosecutors to telework for 1 or 2 days. They are able to arrange their schedule so that they can not be in the office, not have the constant people coming into their office asking questions, because that's what happens when you're at work. I think we can all agree there's a big difference working from home than working in the office. And so I think that that's going to be a huge help to our prosecutors, just to be able to set aside that time, go into a room at their home or their kitchen table and no one else is around, around to review those body cam videos, as well as making sure that the discovery is out timely to defense attorneys, which gives both sides more time to potentially work out plea agreements, which would benefit not only the Commonwealth's attorney, but to also benefit the defense bar and the defendants, whether it be through a program or reduced sentence, a suspended sentence, whatever the case may be. And but I think that would be a good start within the Commonwealth's attorney's
A little bit
office.
earlier, Matt made an aspersion to your party. And obviously, the Democrat Party controls the Senate and the House and the governor's office in Virginia right now. And a lot of new criminal justice legislation came out of this past General Assembly that's been criticized by a lot of folks on the right. But now, as you just mentioned about discovery and about watching body cam videos, this is the law. This is what you have to do.
Absolutely.
Are you happy about this? Or do you think they put too much burdens on you? Can you live with this as a Commonwealth attorney?
Well, I don't think I have a choice but to live with it as a Commonwealth's attorney, because that's what the law is, so we're going to have to follow that. You're right, he did cast a dispersion against my party, and it's unfortunate, because the heated rhetoric that we hear day in and day out just needs to stop. It needs to stop. You know, constantly saying that you'll never hear me say the words defund the police to infer that I would. I have not, I will not, and I never have. I have had many conversations with members of my party, obviously, and I believe that in the debate that we recently had with the two candidates for governor, even Terry McAuliffe said that he is not in favor of defunding the police. We need to fund them. So it's heated rhetoric. It's a scare tactic. If you vote for this person, this is what they're going to do. Be scared. That's not what's happening, and that is not what the Democratic Party stands for. Are there individuals that stand for that? Of course there are. Are there individuals in the Republican Party that stand for extremism? Absolutely. But we don't cast aspersions against the entire Republican Party as a result of that. At least it shouldn't happen. And therefore, it shouldn't happen against the Democratic Party. It just needs to stop.
Matt, you want to respond? I mean, where are we in Virginia in terms of criminal justice coming out of Richmond? How do you feel that's either helped or hurt justice, which was my first question?
Sure. Before I answer that question, I want to go back to the last question for just a second about that speedy trial stuff. While I do believe that that's going to be a challenge, I don't want there to be any mistake about what I stand for. If people commit serious crime, we're going to try those cases. And we're going to try them to the fullest extent of the law. So while I do believe that there are the right kinds of cases where their diversionary programs are appropriate, I don't want that to be lost in this conversation, because that is what the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office is designed and set up to do. I appreciate the comments that the rhetoric's getting out of hand from nationally and statewide. Unfortunately, that is a product of the political system, and that's what we've got. But we have two very, very different philosophies about how we are going to go forward in our society. And I believe Chesapeake errs on the side of center-right politics. I just do. Now, I may be mistaken in that, but I believe that. That's not to say that every single Democrat has every bad policy and every Republican's got the right policy. But if you look at the rhythm of the national body politic and what has occurred in the last session in Richmond, I believe the pendulum swung too far. I believe that, honestly. And I think that we're going to see that. We're going to see crime. Crime is already on the uptick. And I think that people want safe cities, and they're going to vote against that. I may be wrong in my interpretation, but this is not here to denigrate the Democrat Party. It's not here to denigrate my opponent, any of that. It's to say what's right for Chesapeake. And if you look at so many of the reforms that came out of Richmond this last session, I don't believe it's going to make our city safer. And so that's the honest answer. And I guess we'll find out in November if I'm right or not. But even if I'm wrong about that, we've got to do something about the uptick in crime, and we've got to hold people accountable.
Well, let me ask this question. Do you feel, you've been here a long time in Chesapeake, you've been here a long time. Is Chesapeake a less safe city today, do you feel, than it was a few years ago? Are you And if it is, what is the reason for that? And if it isn't, what do you think makes a safe city? Is it a highly funded police department? Is it tough prosecutors? Is it locking them up and throwing away the key? Or is there something else that creates safe cities? I'll start with you.
I mean, I think it is a very special recipe that we have here in Chesapeake with community involvement. Yes, we have a wonderful police department. We have a wonderful police chief. And I think we have a pretty well-run city. And I think it starts there. And I think that the relationships that are built, the community involvement of the police officers has a lot to do with it. I think those statistics do show that crime is on the uptick. And so your question is, are we a less safe city than we were? Anecdotally, perception-wise, I mean, just this past week, there were threats. I have 2 boys on their way to Grassfield High School today, and my son says to me this morning, Dad, I don't think there's going to be a lot of kids at school today because there's all these threats of violence and gun threats going around, and he's hearing that on social media and these copycat things happening. So if you ask me that question, do I perceive us to be in a less safe place? I'd have to say maybe, but I think you can look at the statistics and see the answer to that question. But I think that we have seen an uptick in violent crime, and it's got to be taken seriously.
Well, let me ask Shelley, if we want to maintain a safe city, what's the role of the Commonwealth Attorney?
Well, if I can answer that question first, because I find it interesting. I had a family member who reached out when I decided to run and asked me, what's your opinion about the crime rate and the uptick in crime rate? And I wanted to make sure I was understanding the question, and that sounds odd, but they were from another state. And so I think that the uptick in what we're seeing across the country is one thing. But what we're most concerned about as Commonwealth's Attorney is our city. And when I got that question, I thought, gosh, I really thought that our crime rate in the city of Chesapeake went down. So I actually looked it up and researched it. And our crime rate in the city of Chesapeake over the last few years with violent crime, and most crimes, quite frankly, has gone down. Where it's gone up is property crime and assaults. So your other question was, where does that come from? What do you think that creates that? And that's where we look to veterans who have mental health issues, PTSD, regular citizens, PTSD, mental health issues, who are not getting treatment. They then turn to self-medicating, and they use substances, whether it be illegal or over-the-counter, and they abuse them. And it's a cycle, and I've seen this because I've been doing criminal defense work for years, and I've seen it my entire career. And so when you have an addiction, you steal to go and buy drugs. You use drugs, you then get caught, and you're charged with both crimes. You use drugs or abuse alcohol, you assault people, you create violence. So those are the types of things that we need to look at. Do I feel that our city is any less safe? No, I don't, because I think Chief Wright has done a great job. Nancy Parr has ensured that people are prosecuted accordingly. And I will do the same as the Commonwealth's Attorney. This isn't about selective prosecution and letting people go. It's looking at what the root of the problem is, and let's address that root. And interestingly enough, the Commonwealth's Attorney from Virginia Beach, Mr. Stolley, who is a Republican, recently came up with a program that is to assist people before they get to us in the Commonwealth's Attorney's office and their addiction. So it's those types of programs because, quite frankly, we should all want to save our tax-paying dollars, right? We shouldn't want to have to incarcerate people. So let's find out why they're being incarcerated and what's causing the problem.
But let me ask this question, and I think one of you, maybe it was you, Matt, referred to the sense of an uptick in crime, because they hear about things that are going on, not just in Chesapeake, we're in a big region, okay? So the other day, a kid goes into Heritage High School in Newport News and starts shooting, and 2 people are injured. Newport News may have a perception as a less safe city, perhaps, than Chesapeake, if you looked at the numbers. But do you fear that could happen in Chesapeake at any time or in any other city? Would that then mean Chesapeake is a less safe city?
it can happen in any city, right? We can't predict the future. It can happen here in our city. Do you think that, people in those communities in Sandy Hook and all at Virginia Tech, did they think that they were not safe? Of course not. They thought they were safe. But unfortunately, people with mental health issues went in and shot up those places. Disgruntled employee in the city of Virginia Beach. Did the city of Virginia Beach expect that to happen? Absolutely not. So what I as the Commonwealth's attorney would do is to ensure that we prosecute the appropriate crimes, we prosecute the crimes that are on the books, and we ensure that the police department is properly funded. Now, let me be clear, the Commonwealth's attorney has nothing to do with the funding for the police department.
You could ask.
Right, and the police department is not an employee of the Commonwealth's attorney. They're employed by the city manager.
Right.
So, of course, we could all work together to ensure the continued safety of our city.
Did you understand the question, or did you want me to?
I forgot what the question was.
You forgot what the question was? Well, it just seems like at any time, a city can go from perceived safe to perceived unsafe very quickly, right? So sometimes I almost think that we think everything is safe because we haven't had a kid walk into a high school, which could be Marjorie Douglas in Florida, or just somebody shooting 2 people in Newport News. So do you always, can you live on, we're a safe city? I live in Virginia Beach. They always promote themselves as the safest city, and guess what? We have shootings all the time, right? So can you be lulled into believing we're really a safe city?
I don't know that I'm lulled into believing that we're a safe city. I believe we are a safe city. And let me give you a couple of examples. One of my duties on the city council is to serve on the joint city council school board task force dealing with school safety. And I serve on that capacity with my colleague, Councilman Robert Ike, who happened to come in late. He's sitting in the back, former police officer. And one of the things that we do in that panel is we meet, at least before COVID, we were meeting quarterly. And it was a combination of people from the police department, the fire department, the CIBH, it was folks from city council and city government, and the police chief himself would attend that. And a whole host of other people, school psychologists, principals, and we would rotate where we held these meetings in the various high schools. We did simulated drills within the schools. And I will tell you that I actually believe we are quite well prepared. And you should see the top secret confidential handbook that they've got. It's very impressive. So I'm not lulled into thinking that we're a safe city. I think we're a safe city because we have a special community. We have people that actually value the police. We have good schools, and that's part of it. But one thing that you kind of alluded to before, and you said, well, do you think these things are going on outside are bad, or that you have no control over? Well, the General Assembly this past cycle repealed a bill that required high schools and schools to report certain crimes to the police or certain threats to the police. And I don't think that that's safe. And that is exactly the kind of stuff, if there is something going on, that we need to know about.
Let me ask another sort of technical question that was submitted. Do you support a no-drop policy on certain crimes? I'm assuming you know exactly what I'm talking about. If so, what crimes and why?
So currently, the Commonwealth's attorney already talked about earlier the no-drop policy with regard to drunk driving. The other policy that the Commonwealth's attorney currently has is a no-drop policy with regard to domestic violence charges. That has been in place for several years. As I understand it, that is in place because of the funding that the Commonwealth's attorney's office gets, and it's based on a grant. And so that grant, part of that grant requires that there be a no-drop policy. It's a very difficult question, and I'll tell you why. As I said, I've done criminal defense my entire career. And it's very unfortunate when a domestic violence case comes through. And unfortunately, more often than not, a victim comes in and they say, we've made up. I don't want to prosecute. I don't want to go forward. I don't want to testify. And the Commonwealth's attorney looks at that person and says, I'm sorry, we're taking this case now, and while you are the victim of this case, we're going to try it, and so we'll see what happens. And so then what happens is we use judicial time, we use the court time, we use the system time to put on every single trial for that victim to say, I don't remember. I don't know what happened. And then ultimately the case gets dismissed because the judge has no evidence, right? We then have the flip side of that. And the flip side is a horrible story when I was a public defender, and this man comes out of lockup. I was pregnant with my first child, and he was a high school football star from Deep Creek High School. And he sat down beside me and he called me by my last name, said, "What's up, Phileron?" And I thought, oh my gosh, why are you here? Well, he was accused of malicious wounding against his girlfriend. And she was in the military, and so she was gone on deployment, and the case gets put off, and finally she comes back and she says, Steve Allen did this to me, but not that Steve Allen. So the prosecutor had to make a choice, either put it on, and meaning we have a hearing, and let the judge decide, or I don't. And so we go in, and the prosecutor chose not to go forward because she didn't have evidence. This person could not identify my client. And that was tough because then 2 weeks later, I was watching the news, and he was charged with her death because he bludgeoned her to death in her apartment in Hampton. And he is, to this day, serving time for that. And that stuck with me as a defense attorney because I didn't really do anything. I didn't proactively defend him necessarily because I didn't have to say anything. I just went in and sat there when the prosecutor said, we're not processing this case. But that has stuck with me. So it's a very difficult question because I've seen it as a judge when people come in, and I have said to people, and I tell them that story. And I said, I hope that you really search inside for what you're going to do when you walk out these doors. Because you're either going to walk out these doors and you're going to go and you're going to be with that person who most likely did something to you, but the evidence doesn't bar itself out, or you're going to be safe. And so it's a very difficult question to say whether to lift the policy or not, because it does take up a lot of judicial time. But then again, there are people who are abused and they're afraid to testify. Yes, absolutely.
Matt, do you want to this is about the no drop policy.
Sure. I'd be glad to actually answer that question. I don't believe that Ms. Parr has these policies in place because of funding. I believe she has them in place because these are the tenets of what she believes in to keep this community safe, period. And if I'm elected to do this job, I will bring the same level of seriousness with the policies that I want to put in place, using my beliefs and my integrity as my guiding light. It's not about funding, and I think it is certainly within the discretion of the Commonwealth's attorney to set those policies in place.
A question came up, was submitted about implicit bias. Do you believe that it exists? And if so, what would you do as Commonwealth Attorney to attempt to limit its influence in the criminal justice system? I'll start with you, Matt.
Do I think implicit bias exists? Yes. I don't believe that we are all immune from certain biases. I think it exists. But this goes back to the things that we were talking about before, about bending the curve, doing the right thing as prosecutors. This talks about looking at the facts of a case, looking at the complexity of the situation, looking at diversionary programs if they're appropriate with the right kind of crime, and not using bias to do the wrong thing. And I think, again, and I'm not trying to beat this issue with a dead horse, but if you put the right people in place and you empower them to make those decisions, we can have a safe city, and we can hopefully combat some of those biases. But do they exist? Sure.
I agree. I think it's unfortunate human nature that we all have implicit biases, and I think that it's becoming more prevalent and more known to everybody. Everybody's more cognizant when they look at someone or watch TV or see something that they think, oh, wait a minute. And I don't think that there's necessarily any ill will from it. But yes, I think that there are, and I think that they have absolutely been shown in our criminal justice system. And I think that that is something, as Commonwealth's attorney, I absolutely will ensure that we try our very hardest for that not to happen, because it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't matter from what background or what zip code you come from. I'm glad you asked this question, because it's interesting that I understand that Mr. Hamill made a remark when asked about bail reform. And it's a hot topic in our country and certainly here in our city. And when asked about bail reform and what his position on bail reform was, his quote was, "Well, I think if you're a lifelong resident of the 23320 or the 23321 zip code, then the presumption for that person should be there to get out." So just those zip codes. I'm in 23322, so a little concerning
You're
there.
staying in. Well, let me ask,
Yeah, I'm
because
staying in.
that actually was going to be my next question about bail reform, because there, across the country, from what my reading, is that a lot of poor people are in jails, city jails, county jails, because they couldn't post bond. Whereas if you have the money and the resources to get out, you get out. So do you think that high fines, fees, and inability to post bail is disproportionately a problem for poor people, white or black or any color in this country? And is that something you'd be sensitive to as the Commonwealth Attorney?
So I do understand and agree with the argument that there are people who are disadvantaged who will not be able to post or come up with a cash bail to get out, and that could disadvantage people in various ways. What I said in that particular forum was, we need to look at these cases on a case-by-case basis. If you've got somebody here from out of state who commits a crime, and the question is whether or not to grant that person bail or not, versus somebody who's lived their entire life in a zip code like a 23320 or a 23321, we've got to look at that on a case-by-case differently. If we're worried about that person coming back and we're worried about the severity of that crime, we've got to look at this on a case-by-case basis and then offer those people, in the appropriate circumstances, bail. If not, then no. But I do think that there remains a place in our society for cash bail. That may not be a popular thing to say, but I believe with the right analysis, it should remain in place.
All right, let me ask you this, and maybe this is the last question, because we've had a Commonwealth attorney in Chesapeake, Nancy Parr, who you both have praised for 16 years, but that's a long time, okay? And you're coming in, one of you, with fresh eyes and looking at this. I believe there's some folks sitting in the back here who work there now, okay? Tell me how you're going to look at the personnel who are there now. We've talked about some of the policies there now. I mean, will you go in looking at maybe there's some dead wood here, maybe we've been not casting any particular aspersions here, but that is a long time, and certain policies have been embedded there, and that's the way they are. So tell me, as whoever wins here, how are you going to go into this office? What's going to be your view of, do we keep the way it is, or do we make changes? What will be your criteria? I'll start with you, Shelley.
So I opened up my own law firm in 2006. So I too have founded a firm, and I ran it for 14 years until I merged with my current firm, where I'm the managing partner. That being said, I have been in leadership roles. I've helped found a local group who does charity for CHKD, and so, you know, I have served on that board, and I've been in leadership roles. That being said, and as I said, very experienced, and know every single one of the attorneys in that office. I know every single one of them that are sitting here today and listening. And when I decided to run, I reached out to each of the deputy Commonwealth attorneys. Because I've been doing this so long, I know that there is fear. There is fear from people in this office and every office where there's a Commonwealth attorney's race of losing their job, of not being able to have their own voice, which we all have a right to do, to be able to stand up and say that I support Shelley Wood or I support Matt Hamill without any ramifications of being fired. But unfortunately, in offices across our Commonwealth and perhaps even across the country in district attorney offices, that happens. I know all of these attorneys. I know them to all be good attorneys. And I relayed to the deputies that I have no intent of going in and, quote, cleaning house of these attorneys. If I find out that, especially if I find out that they have supported Matt versus me, that's not the right thing to do. You don't lose a job because of that. Instead, I intend to go in, review the policies, as Matt has stated, and see what happens. I mean, I've seen them from this side. I'd like to see them from the other side and be able to evaluate them as their boss and their supervisor. And if I find that perhaps they're not meeting the criteria or the standard that I feel is appropriate, then we're going to have a discussion of whether they're going to continue in the office. But do I intend to go in and clean house and fire people because I found out that they were a Matt Hamill supporter? Absolutely not. It's not appropriate.
Matt Hamill.
Yes, sir. I think this comes down to leadership. You know, one of the advantages I think that I have from a military background is going to a new command every couple of years. And when you come into a new command, there's always uncertainty because you have a new boss, a new commanding officer. And I think the key is to understand what the philosophy is of that commanding officer. What's the integrity? What's the backbone? What do they want to accomplish? What's the strategic objective? And you've got to then talk to your people and say, do you want to be a part of this strategic objective? And if the answer to that question is yes, then you ought to give them an opportunity to continue on doing that job. I don't believe, unfortunately, we are the victim, so to speak, of an elected system. That's the way it is. So in order to get to be in a position, you have to run through this process. I think it would be unhealthy, unfair, and just not right to go in and clean house with a whole bunch of people who've done amazing work for many years. And I supported Ms. Parr. Actually, the last I can remember 8 years ago walking my neighborhood with my daughter in a Hot Wheels for her because I thought the spirit and her goals and what she was trying to achieve and the people she put in place were the right people. And so, does that mean that every single person who's there should stay there? No. Does it mean that every person who's there wants to stay there under a new leadership? Probably not. But I think that those are the kinds of conversations you have, you evaluate, and you don't do knee-jerk things. You make, because the system needs to function. And most of the people in that office that I know, and I know many of them too. In fact, one of my best friends is the chief deputy right now, who I served with in the Navy Reserves for over 10 years. These are career public servants. They're not politicians. And so I don't believe that cleaning house and doing those kinds of things is right. I don't think it's fair to them and their families, and it's not what I'm about.
All right, well, that's the end of my questions. I think we've had a great debate tonight between two excellent candidates. I think you're very fortunate to have these two people running for this important job. So we're going to give each of you a couple minutes to do your closing statements. And you went first?
I did.
So Matt, you go first this time.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here this evening. I know it's been a little long, and I appreciate the conversation. I really want to thank you, Mr. Rubin. I think the questions were very, very insightful. I think you pressed us appropriately, and I really did enjoy myself. And I also want to say thank you to Shelley, to Miss Wood up here. We've known each other for a long time. We've had many, many cases against each other. And I want to thank her for the manner in which this campaign has been run. We actually met each other at a bar function, in a bar.
That's bar.
Yeah.
Well,
Like
it was
Chesapeake
It was
Bar.
a Chesapeake
Oh,
Bar
I'm sorry.
function.
I just need to,
Chesapeake
in my
Bar.
role as the moderator, I do need to clarify that.
Well, in this case, it was both. It was a bar function in a bar, but it was Big Ugly Brewing, and we pledged to run a clean campaign, and I applaud you for doing that. Look, this is a very, very important race for the future of our city. We need to have a person leading this office who will lead it in a manner that is consistent with the values that the majority of our citizens believe in Chesapeake. As I said at the outset, Chesapeake chose my family. The Navy ordered us here, and it was actually my wife who ordered us to stay here. because I was out doing all sorts of things. I was TAD all over the country, all over the world, in Iraq, and I came back and she said, look, you can take Navy orders wherever you want to go out of here, but if you want to live with me and your children, you're going to stay right here in Chesapeake. And so I've said time and time again that the Navy ordered me here, but it was Karen Hamill who ordered me to stay. And she happened to be a UVA grad herself, Joel. Not from here, but here. And she recognized, and I recognized, that this is the kind of place that you want to raise your family. It's that simple. And that's why I'm in the race. I'm in the race because I believe I've got the values, the leadership, and the integrity to do the job, or I wouldn't be in the race. And like I said, I got to hear a little bit about our philosophies tonight. There's a whole lot more. There's a whole lot more to that. And I encourage you to reach out and ask me any questions you want to know. Anything about my military background, anything about my litigation background, or my criminal background, or my family law background, or my military experience. Ask me anything you want to know. But at the end of the day, you've got a choice to make. And you've got to choose what you believe is right for the future of this city. I hope through tonight and over the next several weeks, like I said at the very beginning, I sincerely hope to earn your trust, your confidence, and your vote. Because this is bigger than running the office. It's about the future of our city, and it's about keeping the city safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you also to Joel. Appreciate your moderating tonight and the questions that you've given us. And hopefully everyone here in person as well as live streaming and on our local TV stations have been able to get some information that allows you to be better informed in what decision you should make. And I put to you this: I am the better decision. I should get your vote. And I get your vote because, as Mr. Hamill stated, Matt, on his recent literature, experience matters. It absolutely does. And I have the most criminal experience, not only in this city, but in this state. Federal court is also different than state court. And I have lived it my entire career. I lived it before I went to law school as a paralegal. I am from this city. I know many of the faces that are here. And I, too, believe that we need to continue with the morals and the values of our city. There seems to be an inference that has to do with party lines, that historically the city has been Republican and not Democrat. But I implore you all to go and look at those statistics. And Chesapeake is blue. We in this city have elected those officials that are Democrats. But this office is not about being Republican, and it's not about being Democrat. It's about the experience and the knowledge and the capability of going in and making sure that every one of our citizens receives fair justice. Every victim is treated fairly and with justice. And at the end of the day, every person that walks through those doors feels like they've been heard. And I will be able to do that for our city and work with our city officials, some of whom are here, some are who not here, to work for the betterment of our city. We are a wonderful city. And as Commonwealth Attorney, I will ensure that it continues to be great and will be even greater. And so I ask you for your vote. And if you're early voting or on November 2nd, vote Shelley Wood for Commonwealth Attorney. And thank you so much for being here and for your time.
Shelley, Matt, thank you very much. I thought this was a really great hour and 11 minutes. I thought there was some really good answers, and appreciate all of you being here in the audience, those of you who are watching. Thank you, Chesapeake TV, for broadcasting this, and have a great evening, everyone.